So, what exactly is the job of a fractional executive? If your business is going to hire somebody to be, an outsourced CFO, CEO, maybe chief revenue officer, what can you expect someone like that to do? So, this is kind of a multifaceted question. There's lots of different ways to approach it, but it's also a tough question to answer. And part of the reason why it's tough to answer is because sometimes it's hard for us to know what any executive is supposed to do. And one tool that we use regularly that's designed to try to kind of help with this is something that's called the executive's hierarchy of responsibility. And I'm going to share my screen here with you, and we're going to talk about kind of what that hierarchy of responsibilities that every executive has, kind of what they are. And I think this can also help us understand what we should expect if we're going to hire out some help in the executive suite of our business. So we're going to go from the bottom of the list to the top. So the things at the bottom of the list are the things that the buck still stops with the executive, but these are the things that are lowest on the priority list when it comes to how the executive spends their time. So at the very bottom of our list of 4 areas of responsibility for all executives is continuity and compliance. So what is continuity and compliance? So these are the activities that are necessary for the business to function. These are the things that are required in order for us to be able to stay in business. It's things like following the law, paying taxes, just kind of basic stuff like that, mandatory reporting. If you're in an industry that's subject to OSHA regulations or HIPAA regulations, it's having a game plan to be compliant with those programs. These activities typically are non-customer facing. They are also typically non-revenue producing. They're still necessary for the operation of the business, but they don't usually change the experience of the customer. They have to happen, but they're not maybe part of your core offering. So that's kind of like the lowest level of things that the executive is responsible for. And as we kind of like climb the chart here, next is operations. So now we're getting a little bit closer to the customer or the client. But operations, it's all this stuff that has to happen so that you can successfully deliver on the commitments that you've made to clients. So this is what it takes to actually give the client the product or the service to create the value that client hired you to create. So your business exists because there's something that you provide, that you produce, that you offer. This is when you actually give it to people. So that's what operations are. More important than continuity and compliance, still working our way up the list. Next order of priority, the next priority as we go up the list here is business development. So it doesn't matter how good the product or the service is that you have, unless you have a game plan to let people know about it and to get them to buy it, your business is going to fail. You have to create new customer relationships. You also have to have a game plan for how you're going to grow existing customer relationships. That is all part of the work of business development. And in creating clients or creating customers, part of what you also have to do is communicate to the general public, and then identify those members of the general public who are appropriately qualified candidates to do business with you, and then to start to build a relationship with them and give them opportunities to choose you. So that's the business development work. And then at the top of the heap, even more important than any of these other 3 things, is what we're just going to refer to as resource allocation. So what do we mean by resource allocation? So every individual, as well as every business, has a limited use or a limited supply of some basic resources, things like money, time, emotional energy, intellectual firepower, You also have a limited supply of things like equipment or raw materials or things like that are available to you. So the most important job of the executive is to be able to identify how to use those limited resources in the most effective way possible. That is the top of the heap in terms of executive responsibility, is figuring out kind of what areas are your highest impact areas, and then how can you deploy resources in that area in a way that gets you that high impact potential. Now, all of this is a slightly more involved way, kind of thinking about this in a hierarchical sort of a way, to kind of explicate one of my all-time favorite quotes by a guy named Peter Drucker, the guy that kind of is kind of credited as inventing management science. But he said, this is kind of a shorthand way of summarizing the quote, but he said that the executive's job is to identify the most important thing to do and then to only do that thing. So this is a way to kind of maybe help with the identification of what that most important thing is. So if that's your job as an executive, it's to identify the most important thing and to do that thing, then what should you be looking for in a fractional or an outside executive? Well, what I would suggest, one way to think about it, is you are trying to, I'm going to draw a line right through the middle of this. You are looking for someone who can come into your business and they can help you significantly reduce the amount of time that you're spending on these bottom two things, and then to redeploy all the energy and effort that you free up into the stuff that's above the line, into growing the business. That's what number two is, but also making smart resource allocation decisions about how to run the business. I want to say too that I think that the phrase resource allocation, that really is a synonym with strategy. So all strategy is resource allocation decision making. So probably the most important thing that the executive does is own strategy for the organization. So fractional executive help should free you up so that you spend less time on this, below the line stuff, and then put you in a position where you can redeploy that effort above the line. Also, a good fractional executive should be able to give you helpful strategic input in the stuff that's above the line. So what can that strategic input look like? Well, sometimes they can maybe help you analyzing data, or maybe give you a fresh perspective on how to orient yourself to the data that you already have about your business, to help you with decision-making about business development and resource allocation. Another thing that fractional executive help can offer you is a sounding board, because one of the things that can happen whenever you are, when you're the boss, or whenever you're the owner, or you're the chief executive, is it can be really hard to be able to identify who inside your organization is an appropriate person for you to have certain types of conversations with. If you grew up in the organization, if you didn't found it, but your career kind of progressed through the organization and now you're leading it or running it, one of the things that you might have found is that the peer group that you had years ago when you were still kind of like on the come up, that peer group might not be an appropriate peer group for you anymore. It might not be smart for you to talk through some of the decisions that you're trying to kind of work out with that peer group, because those decisions might impact their career. Or it might involve HR sensitive stuff with other people on your team. And that might not be stuff that it's appropriate for you to discuss with those other people. So sometimes what happens is when you climb the ladder in your organization, you find yourself in a position where you don't have peers anymore. That's something that a fractional executive can help with. They can be an instant kind of ready-made peer group for you as the leader of the organization, and they should specifically be qualified to help you with these kind of like two top priority items here. So that's a little bit about what you should be thinking about and looking for when you look for fractional executive help. You want somebody that can help you pay attention to the highest priority responsibilities of the executive, and someone that can be a good wingman, partner, thought, kind of like thought partner to you, when you're working on those higher priority issues like business development, like resource allocation.